Sarah, first of all, good morning. It's
Lovely,
so much,
morning.
it's a lot earlier for you in Australia. And I'm so grateful to have this time with you. It's interesting. As a podcast host, first of all, I'm just a very curious human. And when I discover somebody that I want to have a conversation with, there's some body of work that I get dialed into. And then when it comes time to have a conversation with them, prior to that, there's a lot of prep work that goes into it. And in all the prep work that I've done to be here with you in this hour, I mean, there's so much that I want to talk about. You're a neuroscientist. You're an author of an incredible book that I just love so much. You're an educator. So it's like, and these are all huge pillars to dive into. So I'm going to do my very best because I'm known for like rabbit holes, but they're fun. I'm going to do my best. What's that?
I hope I'm going to live up to expectations.
Oh, no. Yeah. I mean, listen, let me just set the table by saying thank you, first of all. I mean, honestly, how I first discovered you, this is like one of the beauties of Instagram, because obviously Instagram has a lot of things that aren't great, but there are several things that are wonderful, and connection is a huge piece. And I discovered you through an IG Live that I was listening to from Andrew Huberman, and he gave you a shout out. And I was like, immediately, okay, I need to look into her. And then I look into you and I was like, oh, okay, amazing. And it's interesting. So this was right before your boot camp in March started, right? And I signed up for you had like 10, it was like 10 emails, one email a day for 10 days or something. So first of all, your writing is beautiful. I have this, and I say everything I say. You don't know me yet, but everybody who knows me, I'm very real. Like, I'm nice, but I don't give you handouts. Like, it's very authentic. And I'm reading your emails. I'm like, this is probably the best email subscription I've ever signed up to.
Wow. Gosh.
I know. Well, I mean, listen, I am a geek. I'm so
Very nice to hear.
Well, it's a talent, and then I pick up your book and I'm like, I can hear you in the book. I've been writing my whole life. So I'm, writing is really passionate space for me. And it's, the book, Woman's Brain, it's so great for the information, but it's also the fact that I can feel you talking to me in the book. So we're going to get into all that. I just want to set the table by saying I'm so appreciative of you and your work. And so I'm going to do my best to.
It starts to get a bit embarrassing now.
Trust me, all the pressure's on me. Okay. The question that I've been thinking about, like, how do I really want to start this is you've done so much already in your career. What is really inspiring you right now in your career in neuroscience or anything really that, you're kind of moving through in your career? What's really lighting you up right now?
To be perfectly honest, it hasn't really changed.
Yeah.
in a couple of decades. I just really love learning new stuff, probably a bit like what you said, of curiosity. But I have always, since I kind of first met and fell in love with neuroscience, I have always been utterly captivated and interested by just the physiology. It really has got me up out of bed every morning for the last, 27 years probably now that I've been in the space, whether I've been a student or whatever of it.
Yeah.
And there's so much to learn and explore, and I am just totally driven by learning new things. So totally nerd. I just thoroughly enjoy that almost more than anything. And really the work that I do now, because I've got this philosophy, all these purpose kind of philosophies you can have. It's pretty simple Venn diagram. Is it awesome and does it help? And there's so many things that are awesome about neuroscience that I love and are fascinating. And I love to just go down the rabbit hole of that and read papers and think about how that fits in with other ideas. But I guess the beauty and the joy of what I've been able to do is take that career of mine that I've been in since I left school, essentially. And now other people are starting to become as interested as I always have been. And that's fun as well, I suppose. overdoing being in the world of neuroscience for so many years. I can connect the dots between lots of different ideas now. And that's really, I can feel that in myself. And being able to share that with other people is kind of a bit of an icing on the cake. But honestly, to be perfectly honest, selfishly, the cake is just it's really the science, the physiology, the biology. I just think it's really interesting. And I was doing it before anyone else cared to listen to what I had to say, and it was still just as good then.
I love that. I know it's like a hot topic right now, right? I feel like neuroscience, right? It really is neurobiology. Yeah.
And it's really been in the last, so I left academia and working within the neuroscience research lab about, my oldest son is turning 13 next Tuesday. It's Tuesday here in Australia, in 1 week. And I was just pregnant with him when I left academia in the research lab. That was kind of a coincidence that I was pregnant with him, although, I mean, maybe it wasn't really. It's probably part of the journey, right? And then there wasn't really an interest. So we're talking like 2008, 2007, 8 then. It was really just a niche thing. It's really been, I suppose, in the last 5 years that I've seen this growing thirst outside of academia and the science and the research world. And that's been really cool to be part of that, and to kind of be sitting in that space, and to feel that I can contribute to that in a really thoughtful and wise and smart way, because there's a lot of people trying to do it who don't have the good strong foundation. And I'm just love being able to be part of that.
You're an OG. You're an OG. You're an originator. That's what,
I don't know. I mean, there's some OGs that go back a whole lot longer than me, but I suppose within that public communication, science communication, social media, it's I suppose I've got quite high standards about. I was trained as an academic. I have to have really high sort of critical thinking skills and standards, and I'm very, very passionate about making sure that carries through to what I'm just doing, but what I'm teaching other people to go off and share as well.
Yeah, I know. I love that. I mean, you are bridging the gap, and I think that that's from the lab to real life. One of the things I love about having my podcast, like I said, I'm a curious woman. I'm an empowerment coach. I am a very introspective. I came out of the womb. I don't know if it's like a special edge that I have, but self-awareness is very potent, and I've fortified it throughout my life through my writing, through meditation, things of that nature. But I'm just really interested in living from my fullest potential, and I built my entire brand and this podcast around that. Right, so it's like when you think about living from your fullest potential, optimal performance, self-mastery, you can't ignore neurobiology. You just can't. Like, you need to, and for me, you see, when you talk about, you get up and you're so excited. I wake up typically depends on when I go to bed, and I sleep early between 4 and 5:30. And I get up, and the first thing that I do after drinking my little herb drink is I get out my Kindle and I start reading. And the joy that I get in, for example, reading your book and highlighting and making flashcards so I can geek out on them later and just keep reading. It's like, I love my mornings, and all of that's to go back to the bridging the gap. What's so special about having this podcast, aside from, spending time with incredible humans like you, is being able to, and you're so good at this, taking a complex subject like neuroscience and distilling it down into a language that is easy for most individuals to absorb and then retain. And I think that it's so important. One of the things I've heard you say that I love so much is, like, you look at life through the lens of neuroscience. I'd love for you to explain what that means, and then how that really connects with what I was just saying. Is there's obviously so much, and we're going to tap into this, but there's so much value in understanding certain aspects, at least, of what goes down in our system of systems from that perspective, that can help an individual to really thrive in life. So you're so good at you know, bridging the gap. And if you want to expand on what that actually means, you know, looking at life from the lens of neuroscience, I think that would be amazing to listen to.
Yeah, I guess I've perhaps had to do that more and more in the last, 5 or so years, since other people have become more interested. Before that, really, I was just interested in the neuroscience, and there wasn't necessarily the kind of the everydayness about it, that lens to be able to put on that. But I have realized over time it is one of many. There are many different lenses we can look at the world. And this is just the one I use. I'm not saying it's the only one or the most useful one, but it's certainly the one I enjoy using. And I suppose over time I have started thinking more that way, simply because people have asked me more questions. And I have learned teaching, and I run professional development courses for adults, because I'm very passionate about adults, humans, grown up people learning about science. There's the young folks, they're still in school and college, and they've got a lot of learning opportunities these days. A little bit tougher right now with the pandemic, but there's so many great people out there in the world doing some really, really important and useful work, particularly within the helping professions, who I'm most interested in working with. So there's sort of the therapists and the psychologists and the teachers, the people who are out there kind of at the front line of humanity, helping other people live better and healthier. And the questions that they have asked me of neuroscience may not have always necessarily been the questions that I've taken into the field in the first place. But I've realised now science is starting to catch up a little bit with some of these questions. There's still some pretty big gaps. A lot of questions people ask of neuroscience, we simply can't offer the solution yet. It's either really, really super reductionist and therefore becomes kind of meaningless, or we could have answered it with behaviour science or psychology. So that could be a bit of a criticism. But for me, it's been, people ask me some really, over the years, have asked me some amazing questions, and I've sort of developed, I suppose, a framework for answering them. And I talk about this in my book and all my courses, and it's a bit kind of clunky, but I can come up with a more sophisticated name. I call it bottom up, outside and top down brain. Put the brain in the middle. And almost it just provides people with a simplified framework for thinking about the neuroscience of. So bottom up is sort of is your bottom up biology. So your physical biology itself, your genes, your hormones, your the food that you put inside your body, how you move your body around the world, anything biological is in constant communication and providing a constant data stream into your brain. And your brain essentially evolved to move your body around and to kind of regulate everything that your body does. So you've got your bottom up biological aspects of neuroscience. Then we've got what I call outside in. So as I said, our brains evolved to move our bodies through the world. That was the kind of the first reason brains evolved. And so we've got this world outside us, which also gets in under our skin and into our synapses and into our bones. A lot of that data comes in through our nervous system, through our eyes and our ears, and what we feel and touch. And so we have the influence of the outside world on our brain, not just nature itself. And I can hear the birds chirping in the trees out there, but the light dark cycle, the planet spins on its axis as it goes around the sun, and we all evolved on this planet that has a light dark cycle. That's a huge influence on our nervous system. But there's other people out there in the world. We're incredibly social, tribal beings, and so there's the other people that we interact and communicate with, and all of the other sort of life experiences, everything else that is out there, kind of the outside in. There's a constant data stream coming into our brain. And finally, the last sort of input or data stream is top down, and that's a whole lot harder to conceptualize and even for neuroscientists to think about. And top down are things like thoughts and emotions and expectations, belief. These are products of the brain, but they also provide input to the brain. And so if you pop the brain in the middle of that, almost any question that we could ask of neuroscience, we can go, let's kind of framework that out, bottom up, outside and top down. You could put insomnia in the middle, we could put depression in the middle, we could put well-being in the middle, we could put, how does coffee, I'm just drinking a cup of coffee, tell me about coffee in the brain. We can consider all of these from the bottom up, outside in, and top down. That's kind of a framework I've developed to think about, to teach about, and to talk about
that is
the work through the lens of neuroscience.
It's literally one of the, I feel like in learning about that, and I'm so happy that you just explained it because I definitely plan to ask you about it. That is like, I don't even know, I get emotional because it's so powerful to actually attain that information. And it's so applicable. So example, like in my coaching, empowerment coach. So it's a lot of like mindset, but I'm also an athlete and I'm also a geek when it comes to nutrition, all of it, right? So if a client of mine is having some kind of issue, maybe is feeling, lower energy, not very robust, all that. I'm not just going to stay up here with them. I'm asking them all of these questions. How's your sleep? What's going on in your relationships? All that. But given that framework, so it's kind of like I'm touching on that, but not. Please.
And all of these outside in, bottom up, top down factors are all, interacting with each other. And I do think that the top down is the hardest to address. Mm-hmm. It's hard to change your mind using your mind. I'm hopeless at that.
Oh my gosh.
Using your mind to manage your mind is one of the hardest ways to do that. So I just kind of, draw back a bit, look at this, framework. If perhaps someone is feeling a bit kind of depressed, a bit low, a bit blue, we could go, well, what's a pretty easy bottom up way to change how you may be feeling or change your mindset is, get up and move your body into a different context. So you've got, you're moving your bottom up body, but you're moving yourself into a completely different environment, which is changing immediately then two of the sort of the streams of input that are coming in. Your body's moving, you're in a completely different environment. The other day I was just like kind of caught myself up in all of these thinky things. I grew up in New Zealand. My husband's family's in Ireland. I was sitting on the beach watching one of my boys surf and just gotten this whole thinky thing about, when will the world ever come back and we can see our families again? Yeah. And I really I spiraled myself down pretty quick, as we can all do these days. I was like, I've got to get myself out of this, and I'm trying to think my way out of it. And I'm like, come on, you know better than this. Ripped off my hat and my sunglasses, jumped in the ocean. It's something as simple as, and I'm not saying that we should all jump in the ocean to cure everything, although salt water, sweat, tears in the sea.
Pretty medicinal.
Jumped in the sea under a wave, and I completely changed so much of that data feed coming in. Switched the minds. It switched that suddenly that thought wasn't even in my head anymore. In fact, the thought was there, but it wasn't consuming me with a lot of negative emotions because my body was busy dealing with this nice cold water. And so just little things like that I use all of the time to kind of pull myself up, pull myself back.
Right.
I try not to use thoughts too much to change anything. I do find that it's a tough way in. I'd much rather use bottom up or an outside in technique.
No, I love that.
A lot of them,
I feel like it's effective. I created sometimes I'll do solo episodes, and then I had an episode where I was talking about when you feel kind of doubt or things of that nature, which I'm confident, but that of course I'm not immune to those feelings. I'll go do something physical that demonstrates my strength to me. And that stimulus, it changes me. It doesn't maybe make an issue go away or whatever, but it gives you a new stimulus, right? And that's exactly what you're just saying when you're.
Do you know why that is?
No, but please tell me.
I'll tell you a little bit about the neuroscience behind that. So the kind of next step beyond thinking about, this bottom up, outside in, is that our brains aren't just this passive receiver of all of this data. Essentially, the brain is what we call, and there's this term going around in neuroscience circles at the moment, the brain is a prediction machine. And what does that mean? It means that the brain is constantly making a best next guess about what's going to happen next to kind of prepare your body within the context that you're in to think or feel or behave in a certain way. It's a little bit like if you're riding a bike along a busy street, you're always kind of looking 10, 20, 50 meters ahead to make adjustments to how fast you're going, what you're going to do with the brakes. Is that pedestrian going to jump out? Am I going to have to, am I about to go up a hill or over a bump? So you're kind of a few steps ahead of where you are on the road at that time.
Sure.
And your brain's sort of doing that all of the time anyway, making a best, kind of a next guess about what's coming up. And we really like certainty. Certainty feeds into that. The brain likes to know that the data coming in is reliable and it knows what's coming next. As soon as data or information becomes a little uncertain or unreliable, and cast your mind back to mid-April 2020.
Yeah, exactly.
We just don't know what was going to happen. We didn't think that by April 2021 we still wouldn't know. Some things have got more certain, other things have got a whole lot less certain. And once there's that kind of the gap in information, we just start to feel worried and anxious because it's not a really comfortable place to be, not knowing.
Right.
Before 2020, the example I would have given would be perhaps you've gone and had some kind of, you've got a lump in your breast, you've gone to have a scan and you're waiting for the results and you do not know what the result is going to be. You're waiting for the doctor's appointment. And there's a massive gap in that information there. So you're going to worry, you fill it up with whatever information you can find, whether you're scrolling through the internet or you just like talking to other people, you just worry. Anytime we don't know what's happening next, that's not comfortable. We don't like that. Our brain doesn't like that.
Right.
So if you do what you did, you go and do something that reminds your brain, hey, actually, I do kind of know what's happening next in this particular moment in time. I'm going to go and lift some weights. I kind of know what I'm doing. I've got my reps all worked out. I've got like a little exercise plan. That immediately provides certainty, something predictable coming in, and it automatically kind of calms you.
Wow.
Because your brain's going, actually, I have agency.
Yeah.
I can still do stuff.
Yep.
And even something as simple as going for a walk along a familiar kind of path around your town or where the beach or bush or wherever you live, is reminding your brain, hey, I actually kind of know what's coming next. And that can be incredibly soothing in the face of great uncertainty and unreliability.
That's so great.
Like, I know what's coming, and even for a moment, you can kind of calm everything down because you know what's next.
Right.
And so why when we should, in times of great stress or uncertainty or anxiousness, if we just go and do something like what you said, some kind of predictable routine.
Yep.
It just you're kind of falling back on all of those systems and processes. You
It's
don't need
so
any,
great.
do something that you can do well.
It makes me think of the classic quote from the Navy SEALs, which is control the controllables, which is so interesting because it actually it's a great quote, right?
Yeah.
And
the military has been training soldiers and one sort of guise or another for hundreds of years all around the world. Lots of countries have always had military soldiers, armies, for thousands of years maybe. So they kind of understand a little bit about human behaviour under great stress.
Yeah.
And they've got a lot of really good systems and techniques that we can draw on. It may not always seem obvious, but those little kind of phrases and they always sound like cheesy memes are really on often hundreds of years of dealing with people in high stress situations.
Right. I think it was do you remember G.I. Joe? Knowing's half the battle. It's still like a classic one, like knowing's half the battle, self-awareness, right?
For sure.
It's so good. But it actually makes me want to ask you a question though, that's a little, it kind of opposes that. So I'm someone who, I always say like train the mind, and this get comfortable in discomfort, right? Yeah. So it's like training yourself. So I'm a martial artist. I train Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. This is one of the greatest methodologies for me to get really comfortable in discomfort, because when you have some heavy man in a gi on top of you and you got to stay calm, because if you don't, like fight or flight and the whole, it's interesting. What would you say about that then? Because, obviously there's a place to control the controllables, to calm yourself. I'm just curious to what you would say about training yourself. Yeah, please go.
It's interesting because they are providing a really well-established framework for dealing with sort of unknowns or stresses or those types of situations. It's not, you're not suddenly wrestling with someone in, you know, a car park on your way home from
Right.
right. You're not in an environment where that was although if you were trained in martial arts, you might perhaps have a better response in that sort of situation because you've been in some form of that situation before and you have training and you have experience. So I think what martial arts do is they step you through, you know, you're not kind of in this black belt situation. I don't know anything about martial arts. I'm saying black belt situation as if I know what I'm talking about. When you are a 6-year-old girl going in for her very first lesson, you are, you know, you're walked through a pretty cool program of training that has been really well established and worked out over years. And the mindset training, you're not, you know, you're stepped through that. So it's like any kind of education or learning or training program, you know, you stepped into these sort of situations and you're taught how to manage your body, how to manage your mind and your body together. So I think you can learn to manage your mind and you should learn to sit with discomfort. But just saying that to someone doesn't mean that they are going to be able to do it. Right. You probably need to step your way through to get to that point. And the mind management is harder. It's not impossible, but it's hard. It's a whole lot harder than the other systems that we have at our disposal in like the moment.
Yeah, no, that's you're right. I mean, essentially, I'm safe to be in this, to test my discomfort levels, right, in my environment.
Person is not coming in. You know, they're in it. They know what they're doing too.
Right.
There's still trust there.
Yeah, no, that's huge.
Yeah.
That's thank you for sharing that. Okay, I want to talk to you a little bit about your book, if you don't mind going there. Because I mean, wow. You know, today I posted on my stories, I was on my walk and I was like, I will never look at a dandelion the same. Thank you. I mean, can I ask you, I want to tear into some parts of it, but what really inspired you to go there, to write a book on women's brain, hormones, health, happiness?
Yeah. Good question. And there is a story behind that I've told a few times, so apologies if anyone's heard it before, but it's just a true story. I had no plans to write a book, was sitting in my office one day, I don't know what I was doing, writing probably, and I don't really feel I'm a natural, you may say it's a talent, I do not feel I'm a natural writer, and anyone who has written anything knows it's a struggle. It's, you know, bloodletting process. It's not easy, it's tortured. I have a quote from Stephen King on my wall. So it's tough. You look at the finished product and think, wow, no one knows what kind of all the backing that goes into writing a book unless you've written a book. But so essentially I didn't want to write a book because I'd written a PhD thesis and had done a lot of writing. I knew it was really hard, it was not on my agenda. And then I was called up out of the blue by a very charismatic lady called Jean Rickmans, who said, hey, I'm a publisher. Have you ever thought about writing a book? And I was like, oh gosh, no, I don't really have any ideas. And she said, oh, that's not a problem. Come on, I've read some of your stuff. I think that we should meet and have coffee. And she is very charismatic and persuasive. So I went, okay, I'll go and have a chat. She sounds kind of interesting. And she's a very interesting woman. And we sat down over coffee and she said, and I said, look, I think if I'm going to write a book, you've got to have an idea, like the idea. You have to be able to, and she said, absolutely. And I said, well, I haven't got one. She said, tell me what you've written before that has really resonated with an audience. And that was easy because I had been writing for the ABC here in Australia, which is kind of our national broadcaster. They had a brain kind of blog for a while. And I'd written an article on menopause and brain fog, kind of looking at that, but also saying, hey, the kind of the foggy forgetfulness and inability to necessarily be able to pay attention during menopause is not the first signs of Alzheimer's disease. So let's not panic about that. There are some other causes. And it was a pretty short little article, but we had an enormous response to that with so many women going, thank you. Thank goodness, because I was really worried that I was getting dementia and I was too scared to do anything about it. So I told Jan this story and she said, well, there's your book idea. And I was like, menopause? Because I was now 46, I was about 42 then. And I was like, I'm not writing a book about menopause. Like, That's something old ladies do. I'm 46 now.
I'm 42. I'll be 43 next month.
You can't slow the biological clock.
Right.
And now I'm like, yeah, look, I'm perimenopause or something. But I'm like, oh, that sounds a bit like old lady sort of topic. And then she made some kind of throwaway comment about brain fog and baby brain. And I went, oh, that's interesting, because baby brain isn't really a thing where I'm from, because I grew up in New Zealand. We've had a prime minister that's had a baby while she's been in office. You know, it was not a thing that was part of any conversation I had ever had. Women had babies, we did stuff, we didn't like wallow around with our foggy brains when we were pregnant.
Yeah.
And it was only after I'd actually had both of my boys, and I switched careers when I was pregnant with my first son, and it was great. It was only later on I heard people talking about this thing called baby brain, and I was like, what a load of rubbish. Anyway, it turns out it's a reasonably well-researched area. And so then but as we were sort of having this, me and Jean were having this conversation I'm having with you now, I went, oh, like there are so many aspects of women's biology that I've never thought about through the lens of neuroscience, which sounds a bit duh, but neuroscience is a really big subject.
Yeah.
But somehow I had got to 42, having worked in neuroscience my entire career, been a female body and brain since I was born, and had never before thought, what's the neuroscience of puberty? What's the neuroscience of the menstrual cycle? What's the neuroscience of pregnancy, of menopause? And I knew there were a lot of questions in there around sex and gender. More girls and women are diagnosed with anxiety and depression than men. I'm like, is that because women go to the GP more and ask for help, or is there some biological reason for that? Women are more likely to be diagnosed with Alzheimer's than men. What is the reason for that? Is that a real stat? And I just was like, oh my God, actually, here's a book idea. I could look at the female lifespan through this lens of neuroscience. Yeah. Which and then Joe went, that's a great idea. She said, go home and write down like kind of a chapter outline. And I realized, and then I was just like, oh my goodness, there are so many questions in here I do not know the answer to. And I was like, I was thrilled by the prospect of finding out stuff I didn't know. So I was in no way any expert on neuroendocrinology or women's health or pregnancy or any aspect of that. But I did know a lot of people who were. And so that was sort of how the book really came about. And the chapter outline, if you get a chance to look through that, you'll see a lot of it as questions, which were essentially,
I love that.
Questions. And I went, I've got to start, and I call it womb to tomb, and utero, childhood, and I just stepped through every point in the lifespan. And actually it was quite funny because I've written teenage brain, and I was like, where am I going to put, I really wanted to do anxiety and depression as a standalone chapter. I did not want to have mental health as part of puberty and the teenage brain and pregnancy and motherhood. I didn't want to have it at every point in the lifespan as if it was inevitable. So I pulled it out. Yeah. And then I thought, what point in the life am I going to put that? Yeah. And then I started writing pregnancy. And then I remember going to Jean, and we'd already had the book. At that point, the publishers had accepted it. The contracts were done. I was writing it. And it was a couple of months in, and then we went to start the chapter on pregnancy. I said, I forgot about the part about getting pregnant. I've got a chapter on sex and love. And I was like, oh my God, I'm going to have a chapter that I haven't even thought about yet, because you've got to get pregnant. And so I was like, oh, part out. And so there's a chapter in there now called, I think, Sex, Love and Neurobiology or something, which was a last minute addition.
Oh my goodness.
That was another moment.
Well, there's so much in there. I mean, let me point out a couple of things that I love, like learning about the placenta when a woman's pregnant with a female, and that the placenta of a female will naturally have more protection against stressors. That's so interesting. And people don't realize, so your placenta, a baby's placenta, is either XX or XY, and I'm very aware, and the world started becoming more aware. Just kind of like the disclaimer. I wrote this book in 2017, and conversations around sex and gender and all of those issues were only really just sort of starting to come into sort of
the world was slightly waking up, becoming a little bit more woke. And it was really hard in so many parts of the book to find really good neuroscience research on basic aspects of women's health. Some areas are really well studied, other areas less so. So to then kind of take it to the next level, to sort of start teasing out sex from gender and different types of experiences of that through the lens of neuroscience is nearby impossible, because I really was very careful to stick to the neuroscience research. So when I'm saying boy, girl, male, female, I'm really, again, through the lens of neuroscience and what research that we do have, and not to be dismissive of anyone else's experience. That's my little aside here. It's a really hot button topic right now. But the vast majority of humans and all mammals, in fact, a male fetus has a male placenta, because essentially the placenta develops from the egg and the sperm and the gamete, and it kind of embeds in the wall, and half of it becomes a fetus and half of it becomes a placenta. So you have a female placenta, we have a male placenta, which I didn't even really, I kind of think I knew it, but I never really thought about it in that respect. And we do know that in utero, males are slightly more susceptible to develop disorders at that point in the lifespan versus females. And one of the reasons we think is that the female placenta is slightly more protective against the stressors, the sort of stressful events that the mother may experience. Now, whether they be psychological stresses, external stresses, or perhaps some kind of, environmental or chemical event as well. So that's really interesting, and that may account in some ways for some of the neurological developmental disorders that boys are slightly more likely to be born with. Autism, those types of disorders that we see.
It just, it's interesting. I have this conversation with some of my friends who also love to geek out in these areas, but like the human body, period, is just so gnarly. Like it's just so vast, and we are a system of systems. Now take the female body, and it's like, okay, hold on. Hold up. And it's so interesting because, I mean, look, I full transparency. Again, I'm in my 40s, high school. I didn't go to college. I was like the entrepreneur straight out of, and really surfing straight out of high school. But I had that entrepreneur mindset, right? So I was like, no, I'm going to hustle, make money, do that, But I'm saying this because I don't remember a lot from school, high school. But so maybe there were things that, were touched on in this area in science and biology, but I was ditching and surfing. So now that I said that, though, I think it's so interesting how we are so complex, and we don't really come with a user manual like your toaster does. We don't. And like, I'm just thinking that, to understand, like one of the greatest things for me about learning about the brain, learning about hormones, learning about mechanisms, food, how nutrigenomics, how all of this stuff is affecting us. That's empowering information, because if I'm here to express myself at my fullest potential, well, then I better know what's going on so that I have a better, I have a better chance. I have tools to adjust what I want and need to perform at more optimal levels, right? So, learning about, going back to your book, to learn about a woman, her brain, the hormones, and like another point I'll just bring up that I love so much was the stereotype of the teenage brain. Am I saying that? That is so useful. I'm like, parents need to read that, if even that one chapter, because it's fascinating, like what's actually happening in the brain of an adolescent. By the way, I love that there was this part where it was like, we don't really know where adolescence ends. I was like, that's fascinating, because maybe when I was 30, I mean,
it's part of a social cultural kind of the teenage years are. I mean, you go back a few hundred years and you didn't have a teenagehood. You kind of went from childhood, and women got married off and men went out to work. And I'm thinking of Bridgerton at the moment. So we don't really kind of know when it's pretty clear when it begins, because puberty is a pretty clear demarcation, and different kind of young people go through that at different times. But kind of when it ends, it's different. And that kind of, even like your early 20s is kind of a developmental point in time when you are really pretty much an independent adult, but you're still kind of trying to find your way in the world. I'm so glad that I am older than that now through this pandemic, and my boys are younger. So
yeah,
that kind of finding yourself, like kind of your late teens, early 20s, is a pretty important developmental point of time. And your brain is still kind of going through that last sort of refinement into adulthood.
yeah,
Around then. It's a pretty important time. And one thing I will say about the teenage brain is people tend to, and people I suppose now are a bit more familiar with some of the neuroscience behind that, and that there are enormous changes that go on, enormous developmental changes in teenagers' brains, and there's a lot of refinement of various connections, and there's a bit of a developmental mismatch early on in terms of some parts of the brain which are involved in kind of emotions and feelings and reward and expectation versus those higher order judgments, abilities to think and make the right decisions, etc. But what people don't realize is that that development of the structure of the brain is experience dependent. So it is driven by the experiences young people are having. So they are kind of primed to kind of go out and experience as much about the world as they can to refine that brain, in much the same way that a little person's brain during infancy is going through this incredibly critical period of language development, and children, as they are going through this rapid period of language acquisition, that is driven by the neurobiology of their brain. The connections in the language parts of the brain are being refined, and they actually need to hear and be spoken to learn lange, in much the same way that teenagers need social interactions to learn to wire up the social parts of their brain. It's quite a good coincidence in life, as I say in the book, that they're actually at high school, because they're kind of at almost their cognitive peak of learning, right when they're kind of learning calculus and history, and so they're learning a lot of information, but a lot of that social change that's going on through the years is also driven by and is driving the refinement of the brain at that point in time. So I suppose I've got as I said, my son's turning 13 next week. So I'm very intimately involved with teenage brains at the moment. It's about us providing the right types of experiences. He needs, I call it the freedom and a framework. He needs to go out, and he's a real thrill seeker, which is slightly nerve-wracking as his mother, incredibly nerve-wracking. His mother, he is an adventure thrill seeking. But it's giving him the opportunity to have those experiences that he needs without killing himself in the process. And I say to him, my burn for him at the moment is, darling, you're so developmentally normal. And then I get back, you're so developmentally normal. He hates it when I say it.
Well, honestly, no, but I remember
in learning about the brain.
Well,
I'm a neuroscientist. Why would he want to know anything about the teenage brain? Because that's mum stuff. Fair enough. I'm not going to. I just say,
sure. Well, God, I'm sure he'll appreciate it later in life. I mean, I don't want to give all the book away. I want everybody to go read the book. I've already done a swipe up today, and it will happen again because it's so good. And, but the risk taking piece that you put in there, and you talk about, male and female and risk taking. So I was just thinking about that, like with your son and being an adventurous.
And I also think, the risk taking thing, we tend to think that young guys, this is, my heart of my mother's heart beats inside me too. We tend to think that they're just going off and doing stupid stuff, but they can actually make pretty smart decisions when they aren't influenced by, social acceptance. And so much, such a big part of teenage life is around, what are the others thinking about me, and being accepted. Kids can make really smart, careful, wise decisions when the others around them don't influence
them. Yeah, you give some great
lofty minds. Just the information feed coming in has got stronger feeds coming in from the outside and social world than almost anything.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Social connection was, that's, I think in all of my research with you, I mean, that's a huge piece that you talk about, the influence, the impact, and essentially, I mean, that's the outside in. We can say that that's outside in, right? In your framework.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and when we think about, I have like a coaching community, a membership. Do I do private coaching? Sure, yes, of course. And there's so much value to that. But the value of bringing like-minded women together in a space and
Yeah,
have them interact, and that it's so powerful. You want to talk
yeah,
about social connection a bit, because I feel like that was a huge through line to,
yeah.
yeah,
And that was interesting because it wasn't an intentional through line, but when I got to the end and I looked back, I realized at almost every point in the lifespan, at every point in the lifespan, without a doubt, that was almost um, the loudest voice in the crowd, so to speak, because I'd written a book and I thought I was going in and it was going to be a book about hormones and bottom-up biology and how hormones shape and sculpt so many aspects of women's lives. But it didn't matter whether it was puberty, and let's like take a look at the biggest kind of reproductive shifts when hormones almost kind of come to the fore: puberty, phases of the menstrual cycle, pregnancy, menopause. Um, the big shifts in hormones that take place at those points in the lifespan sort of open a real window of opportunity or vulnerability. But often what kind of was the loudest voice in the crowd was the social context in which these changes took place. So I'll kind of just choose a couple of studies from
yeah,
that. So puberty was interesting because, again, I said I'm quite intimately involved with pubertal brains and
yeah,
people at the moment.
yeah,
Um, and so often people go, oh, it's the hormones that are making this that way. Kind of is, but there was a really interesting Australian longitudinal study that I talk about in the book, looking at different ages in which children enter puberty, and it looked at girls who enter puberty early but normal, so they start to develop breasts or maybe get their period at say 9, 10, which is early, but it's still in the normal developmental spectrum. We're not talking about 6, we're talking about 9, so early but normal.
hmm,
And those girls are far more vulnerable to develop anxiety and depression than girls that get their periods, say, at around 12, or girls who get their periods, say, at around 16. But
hmm,
boys are a bit different, because boys who develop early, go through puberty earlier than their friends, well, what happens to them? They get tall, hairy, their voice drops, and they rise in social stature and their friendship group because they kind of become the man first.
yeah,
And they're protected against a lot of that sort of emotional turmoil of puberty versus, and we all know, the little guy who was at high school with us who didn't hit puberty until he was about 16.
yeah,
He's far more vulnerable than his friendship group who developed normally. So what you've got here is boys and girls who are entering puberty, and they're all experiencing the surge of hormones. It's having the same effect on their bodies and brains, but the greater influence over their emotional experience was the social context in which that happened, the other people around them, and how they perceived themselves and themselves changing, and the context of their friendship group. That was far more influential. And
wow,
that was really powerful to me, and makes so much sense when you
yeah,
think about it. It's not developing breasts and getting your period. It's, do I fit in with everyone else? How
yeah.
normal, or how am I the same as everyone else, particularly at that point in time? And that's really all that matters. And there was another study which still blows my mind whenever I think about it, because I thought I'll go in and I'll just have a look at a really common way in which hormones influence our emotional state. And
Hmm,
I'll look at this phenomenon of PMS, or premenstrual syndrome tension,
hmm,
in what you call it where you live, where you get a bit cranky and emotional in the few days leading up to your period. And I thought, oh, well, that'll be really easy to find data on. It was really hard to find good data on how many women experience this. And I thought it would be reasonably universal, although I personally had never experienced that. And I don't know whether that was growing up in New Zealand, where we didn't have baby brain either. Very pragmatic, down to earth, just kind of get on with it kind of
right,
upbringing that I had, and sort of society that I grew up in.
yeah,
And there was a lot of certainly there was a great deal of gender equality, and there certainly is in New Zealand today. Just look at the parliament, for example.
hmm,
Um, when I went to look at the stats globally of how many women experience PMS, I found a meta-analysis that compared rates around the world, and it differed enormously across countries. So France and Switzerland were about 10%. Spain was about 40 to 50%. Some places in Asia are around 50. Iran and the Middle East was around 90%. So you got 10% to 90%, depending on which country in the world you live.
it's
And I was like,
amazing.
what is that
So
about?
yeah.
And then followed up with some other studies looking at women who were told, we're doing a study looking at your mood changing in daily life.
Mm-hmm.
Were not told it was about PMS.
Mm-hmm.
And so they were given an app, and you recorded your mood, whether it was positive or negative, and you were given lots of positive and lots of negative and lots of neutral emotions to choose from. A lot of studies like that give women like 7 negative and 1 positive emotion, which immediately skews the choices you feel you have of what you're inputting and how you feel. And it also looked at social support, physical health, day of menstrual cycle, and how stressed people were. But it didn't say it was on PMS. And in those studies where women were blinded, so to speak, as to what the study was about, it was around, they were more like Swiss women, more around sort of 10% of women showed clear variation of mood that tracked to menstrual cycle. Now, when you unblind women and say we're doing a study looking at PMS, it was very different. So again, we are almost influencing which sort of data feed what women are paying attention to in a way. That's not to say PMS does not exist, because it clearly does with some women. But what was a stronger indication of emotions was stress, for sure, ill health, for sure. But most significantly and strikingly in the study was how socially supported women felt. So the loudest voice in the crowd when it came to determining the mood in daily life was the other people around you, not necessarily what day of the cycle you were on. And that was really striking to me, but in a way not surprising when I reflected on all of the different points in the lifespan, whether it be, postpartum mental health. Sure, you're withdrawing from all of those good hormones of pregnancy, but if you've got the right social supports around you, you're going to be so far, you're going to do way better than the woman who is perhaps a single mum dealing with a new baby for the first time alone, who's struggling. It's not the hormones there, it's the social support networks. And we see that at every point in the lifespan, that social outside-in feed is the kind of that sort of support structure, that architecture around a brain. And the worst thing for a human brain can sometimes be another person if it's not the right type of person. The best thing is another person as well. And that was the thread that ended up running through the book. But that was not intentional. That was almost kind of looking back, and I was like, wow. And so I went and I asked every researcher I spoke to, I'd always kind of say to them, so you deal with infant health, or you deal with people in aged care, or you work in women's health specifically with women going through menopause. And I would say, what do you think is the most important thing that could support a person at this point in the lifespan? And they would always come back, it didn't matter which point in the lifespan, and say other people. It's other people that are the most important thing.
Yeah, well, first of all, when I read, just the book in general, but when I read that study too about the women in Iran, that's actually my I'm American, but my parents are from Iran. I was blown away, and it made so much sense to me, and it made me actually think. So before my period, what I noticed about myself is I'm very resilient, very strong, very capable, from mind to my body. A couple days before, I feel like it doesn't mean that anything is different. It's just I feel less resilient. But what makes me, I wondered when I was reading that, I'm like, is it that you kind of cave in a little bit? Like, let's just say maybe I don't feel as much social connect. Maybe I need more hugs in that, just in general, but maybe in that period, I become more susceptible to the lack of the hugs. I don't know. This is just where my brain went. Yeah, it's so interesting.
There are clearly women who are more vulnerable or perceptive to the influences of hormones on their emotional state. But a large part of the woman's experiences of that premenstrual period syndrome may be the stories that we've been brought up with. And when you were talking a little bit before about what you taught at school, women are taught an awful lot through this kind of shared collective wisdom that's come from our mothers and our aunts and our sisters and our grandmothers. And the differences in PMS experiences globally pretty much strongly indicate that there's a strong cultural narrative around your experience at that particular point in time. Whether at that point in time you are, freed up to be cranky because you've almost kind of got someone said biologically you're allowed to be right now. You can
Yeah.
kind of pull out, whereas the rest of the month you've got to kind of be a good woman and, you know, be nice and pretty and well behaved. And there does appear some of the kind of analysis that's been discussed in the feminist literature following on a lot of this work is that in parts of the world where there's less gender equality, there appears to be higher rates of PMS reported. This is not always the case, but there's a tendency towards that, whereby it may be that that's the point in time women are allowed to be cranky and angry, and the rest of the month they have to
They have permission.
Baby.
So they go all out.
Yeah, and I kind of grew up in this part of the world where, you know, compared to other parts of the world, there was a great deal of gender equality. And certainly I was never taught about baby brain, and I was never really taught about PMS. It was not part of any cultural conversation in my immediate family. And I went to a girls' Catholic high school, and it wasn't even part of the conversation there. We just kind of were very much, and I'm Gen X as well, like you. I know conversations change, and we see differences in what people discuss and perceive and think and feel through the generations. And we're sort of, interestingly, we're seeing this in terms of conversations around menopause now. So say my mum's generation, there wasn't much of a discussion around menopause. My generation is a bit more open to talk about it, but still some of our wins in the workplace are pretty hard won. So we're not going to talk about menopause in the workplace because we've right. So to get to where we are, we're not going to like have any conversation around that. Whereas I kind of sometimes think the generation that's going to come in below me, everything's out there. They're talking about everything. Probably be really happy to talk about that. So we've got we've got the cultural conversations, we've got the generational conversations in there as well, and they are as influential over anyone's personal experience of their health and well-being as anything. We can't deny that. And I think that that's perhaps maybe a good thing, but it may also almost have a nocebo, the opposite of a placebo effect in some cases. People are kind of like looking for an experience. I don't know. I haven't got very clear thoughts about that.
No, I love it though. I just love that it raises so much question, and it's a rich subject. I mean, I have 3 brothers, and they all trail right behind me, and then I have an older sister as well. And I was thinking about this when I was reading your book too. In my upbringing, and my brothers are athletes, for probably until 12, when I turned 12. I was kicking their ass in pull-ups, like running, racing. And in my family, there wasn't this difference. Like, it wasn't like, okay, Roxy is going to go do this many, miles, and the boys are going to do this. And my brothers didn't treat me different, and I didn't treat them. And I really have thought about this. In fact, I credit, not to dismiss my sister, but just my brothers, I credit a lot of the woman that I am. It's so woven into my brand. There's this harmonization of masculine, feminine energy. And that's just been a through line in my life. And I feel that a lot of that comes down to my upbringing, and that there wasn't, it was more equal in that, my home environment.
So many of the stories we tell ourselves do come from childhood. And that it's not just people, people end up in therapy to deal with a lot of this, but it can influence us in some really positive ways as well. How we are brought up, these stories that we tell, and these expectations of an experience that we're going to have. And people are really, I guess, quite accepting and of that when it comes to, like shifts in mindset that may help you deal with anxiety perhaps, or feelings, negative emotions like that. But perhaps not so when it comes to issues around female health, which they think are totally driven by hormones. And I guess I say hormones are just one voice in the crowd. And if we go back to the bottom up, outside, and top down, there may be different kind of inputs of data at different points in time in which you're kind of more likely to pay attention to or tune into, or you're brought up to listen to. I think there's a bit of that in there as well. So we have I suppose what it comes down to is we do have agency over a lot more of this than what we may think. We're not victims of our hormonal state, women. We certainly are not by any stretch of the imagination. There's a lot we can do. Some of that may be a bit of a mindset shift as well.
No, I fully agree. And I think that's actually a beautiful segue into when you're talking about mindset. I have to touch on some high performance kind of elements when it comes to neuroscience, neurobiology, and I really want to, as we start to wrap out our episode, I have to make sure that we talk about your boot camp and your courses, which I told you that because I wanted to do March so bad, but there's just my capacity was.
Yeah.
But July I'm in, and I'm so excited about it. But before we touch on that, when I wake up in the morning, my breakfast is dopamine. Just, so it's like, get outside, get some full spectrum light. Literally breakfast is, grass-fed bison and some nuts, and then there's movement. So
doing grass-fed bison for breakfast.
Oh, it's so savory breakfast. People think
Yeah. I like a savory breakfast, but
right?
yeah,
It's
bison. I've had bison before.
Oh, really? It's so good. Yeah, I get mine delivered from a great brand, and it's so good, and it gets me fired up. I feel fueled, and so I would just love for you to touch on some of the kind of lifestyle approaches, that one can take that really supports brain health, and that really, when we think about like what I was just sharing, dopamine, the value of that, like why is that even important?
Yeah. Well, dopamine is one of many, many, many brain molecules. And we hear about there's the famous ones: dopamine, serotonin, noradrenaline, people haven't really heard about acetylcholine. And they, there's like a few, maybe 100,000 neurons in the brain that actually make them, whereas we've got 86 billion neurons in the brain. The vast majority of the processing is done by the neurotransmitter glutamate and another one called GABA, but no one's ever heard of them. I always feel a bit sorry for them. They're kind of like, they do all the hard work, but the small part players get all of the glory. But dopamine and serotonin and the other ones that we've heard of, I like to think of them as, like, if you kind of imagine an orchestra, so glutamate and GABA have done all of the hard work of playing, composing the piece, putting together the orchestra, playing this enormous, wonderful piece of classical music, and then it gets, put out on a classic FM on the radio station. And dopamine and serotonin and some of the more famous neurotransmitters, almost like the volume or the treble or the bass or the balance, kind of dial up and dial down that sound. So the piece that you're listening to is virtually unchanged, but you're kind of adjusting the sort of the levels of what kind of tuning in or out of. That's kind of what dopamine and serotonin do. And dopamine very much is about wanting what you haven't got, what's not near you right now. So it's about kind of desire and wanting, not necessarily liking. Serotonin's more about liking what you have. Dopamine's about moving towards something that you don't yet have, and so you desire. And the interesting thing about dopamine, way back at the beginning of this, I said our brains evolved to move our bodies through the world, to move us from point A to point B, probably where there was food or maybe warmth or shelter. What initiates the movement, the physical movement, kind of get up and move somewhere else, is dopamine. So it's a big part of movement, like literally motivating your body to move its muscles to get you up out of a chair. So that's why people with Parkinson's disease, we see degeneration of dopamine neurons. They have movement disorders and they have trouble initiating a movement.
Sure.
And so part of that, over time, the brain evolved then to not just physically give you a puff of dopamine to kind of get you moving there, but to that desire, that kind of emotional feeling of wanting to get somewhere. So that's kind of what it's about. It's about wanting something that you liked once, not necessarily liking it in the moment that you have it.
Motivation.
So I suppose, you kind of got to get up in the morning, so you need a little bit of neural friction to get you kind of going in the morning. I mean, I'll talk about my daily routine, which makes me sound like one of those kind of influencers that they write about in newspapers. But I do have, over time, sort of developed a bit of my daily routine, I suppose, based on what works for me and what I also believe that the sort of the science shows. So I'm very fortunate to have an east-facing bedroom window, and so me and my husband don't, and we kind of, I elevated and so no one can sort of see into our house. So we sleep with our curtains open. And where we live, the latitude we live in the summer, winter, it really only varies by about an hour and a half. When the sun comes up in the morning, whether it be somewhere between 5:30 and 7, depending on the time of the day, we just wake up naturally with the sun. So I'm getting light in my eyes very early, and I live in a part of the world where it's pretty easy to get out and about. So that light dark cycle, that getting the sunlight in and having kind of panoramic vision early in the day is incredibly important to sort of get you up and going and to kind of set that 24-hour rhythm for the rest of the day. So that's a big part of my morning routine. I don't typically eat before lunchtime. Not that I'm into intermittent fasting, but for me, that's kind of what works best for my kind of my cognitive focus, and also as I'm getting older, kind of keeping body weight from ballooning. No, but I drink coffee. I'll have a couple of cups of black coffee when I wake up. I don't bison. I get up.
It takes me a while. It's not immediate.
And then depending on whether it's a school day or not, or what's happening with my boys, I just sort of get them off to school and sorted. I try and set aside my morning up until, before I eat as my best thinking time. And so I either schedule nothing for that part of the day or a couple of days a week when people need to call me from the US because of time zones or whatever. But I have 2 or 3 days a week when my morning is when I do all of my deep thinking, distraction-free thinking time. And then I'll eat whatever I ate at lunch, and sometimes it's like salad with fish or something. I am a very devoted afternoon napper, only because over the years I always struggled when I got around to 2:30 in the afternoon with feeling like I wanted to fall asleep, regardless of what I'd eaten, regardless of how I'd slept the night before, and I can easily smash out 10 hours solid sleep a night. And even if I've had that mid-afternoon, sometimes I'll just get sleepy, and I used to struggle through that. I remember sitting in university lectures and a gym room like 2 hours trying to stay awake. Now I'll just go out and have a 23-minute nap in the afternoon, and by 23 minutes I set my alarm on my phone for 23 minutes because it'll take me a couple of minutes to fall asleep. I just get that little bit of short sleep in, don't fall into deep sleep, wake myself up. It clears all of the adenosine receptors in the brain, which when you get more adenosine building up in the brain, you get an increase in sleep drive. And that's when that's my kind of day reset. Not every day, but if I need it, I will indulge in that. And I work for myself at home, so I can. If I was a school teacher, perhaps, or a surgeon or an airline pilot, it may not work, but that's what works for me. And then if I'm going to exercise, sometimes I'll exercise in the morning, or I'll go for an ocean swim, or I'll go to the gym and lift some weights, or I'll do a pump class, but I try and walk the dog. And I used to always do this in the morning, but lately I have found, and I don't know whether this is aging, that I'm better off using that morning time to think rather than move. And I move later in the day because later in the day, the kids are in and out. We've got school, sport, stuff going on, and the day's and it becomes a bit more of a muddly part of the day. And so that's when I'll try and fit in, like, say, an hour walk with my dog through the bush at the beach or whatever. So I always used to exercise in the morning, but now I exercise in the afternoon and evening just because it fits better and frees up that morning time for thinking. And then we'll eat whatever we eat for dinner. And I'm not really strict. I eat pretty low carb, but every now and then, like last night, we actually flew in a plane yesterday, if you can believe.
Oh, really?
I had a meat pie at the airport. That's a Kiwi thing to eat a meat pie. So I'm not super strict either. I'll give myself a bit of a break. But typically I eat low carb, Mediterranean style dinner. So I'm not like super strict, and I'm pretty relaxed around how I do that. Sometimes I'll eat toast for breakfast, but very rarely. But if I do, I'm not like freaking out either. You've got to have a bit of pleasure, and
well, and also
for breakfast on Easter Sunday.
Chocolate cacao is actually,
like that doesn't mean the next day I'll just go back to how I normally eat.
Well, so, okay, a couple of things I have to say about.
Yeah.
First of all, I'm so glad that you walked us through that, because I'm sure so many people, myself included, it's like when you know all that you
Yeah, I
know.
should say I go to bed really early as well. Like I'm in
Oh,
bed by 9 typically, and I read, and then I can easily, almost all my husband is just like, where's the time for me? We've been together 20 years, so he's had plenty of me. I'm like, I'm in bed early because I'm rising with the sun.
I'm in
Anyway,
bed between 8 and 9.
yeah.
But I wake up so early, and it's part of my
Yeah.
joy in life, So, and
Yeah.
I don't like, here's the thing. I wake up and I'm not tired. I wake up and I'm
Oh,
ready. And that's
never,
the,
never.
right?
Yeah, the
Well,
problem is now my boys are going to bed after me.
right.
That's
So that's
starting to be a bit more
interesting.
difficult, but that's all right because my husband's still up and he can manage them. I'm like, I did my time with them.
Yeah.
Your time, it is now your time is dad's time.
That's so good. Well, yeah, I was saying though, I think it's so great that you just walked us through that, because I know a lot of people, myself included, it's like when you know that you know about the brain and neurobiology, like how do you function in your everyday life? So there's so much value in just sharing your process. And one thing that I can also say about your process that I find a lot of value in, and I talk about this a lot, coaching community, just in general, is it's the macro, right? It's not, first of all, we don't want to be rigid. We don't want our systems controlling us. No way. There's no autonomy in that. So yes, I have a ritual in the morning, the reading, the meditation, but if for some reason one day I need to switch things up or feel like I want to get out inside and move instead of being in my journal, I'm not hooked to the system. And if I don't do the system, then so I love that you say, you might have toast and it's not the end of the world. Who cares? Because overall, what you're doing, the steadiness is, there's just a lot of harmony that is optimizing your system as a whole. So these moments don't, I think that's huge, because I'm sure that you've come across it as well, but there's a lot of people who get so rigid and stuck on, am I doing the right thing? And it's like so counterproductive. You're not supposed to be stressed about things.
Yeah, and that just makes you stressed. And
right.
You have to have some flexibility in there. And I think I'm really kind of and I am prioritizing sleep. Like I talked about my morning waking up, I talked about going to bed early, I talked about that, and I prioritize like that. That is the number one for me.
Yeah.
And everything else follows quite easily from there. If that's disrupted, and my husband always laughs at me because he wakes in the middle of most nights and reads, and I'm just like lying there.
Just out.
I have like, I go, he always jokes like if I go to bed at 11 o'clock and I'm having a late night, I'm like, oh my God. It's like, there's no flexibility there. But if I prioritize that, everything else falls into place. And I am incredibly fortunate where I live in the world that, we're pretty much, we've got no COVID in the community. We can hang out in pubs and restaurants, and our kids can go to school, and we can flew in a plane. Yesterday we had enough. But I'm so fortunate where I live, and I know not everyone is as lucky as I am right now. But I've kind of tried to create a business and life that enables me to kind of live that way.
Yeah.
And again, not everyone's able to do that, and I'm pretty aware of my my great fortune in life that I've been able to do that.
Yeah. That's amazing. And it's,
Yeah.
And I just will point out, you're also, it is special to create that life. I live that in my own life, I will say though, you are such a contributor. So, you're living this life that you've designed for yourself that allows you to, be fulfilled, to be able to do the things that really light you up, and at the same time, you're such a contributor. You are making a massive difference in the lives of anybody who, is learning from you, connected to you. So I don't know. I think that's something interesting. It's something that I like to highlight because I value it deeply. So, okay, I have to be mindful of your time. I could talk to you for forever. Before we move into, I have a question that I love to ask all of my guests, and then I have a few rapid fire words that you could be rapid in your response or not. But before I even touch that, let's just really quick, if you don't mind, and I'm going to be sharing this as we get closer, but your courses, the boot camp, please, because I think that this is so valuable, and I'm really excited, for July to come and me to get in that boot camp.
Sure. Well, I teach online professional development courses in neuroscience for people in, as I say, the helping professions. So coaches, therapists, psychologists, teachers, people, social work, people in special needs education come in. So there's the main neuroscience course, and there's 3 sort of ways that you can do that. And then there's also a women's brain health and neurobiology course. But the main neuroscience course you can do either as a 12-week program online, or you can do the sort of the super intense high-speed bootcamp version, so the identical curriculum but taught over 2 weeks. So with the 12-week version, we do 1 or 2 lessons a week, and we start off looking at the basics of brain biology and physiology, step up to looking at things like cognition and emotion and motivation, more kind of coachy kind of ideas around goal setting, behavior change, and then we take a look at the basics of brain health, sleep, nutrition, social connection, all of those in the kind of the last lesson. So there's 17 lessons which covers from sort of basic neurobiology through to brain health. So as I said, the 12-week version, we do 1 or 2 lessons per week. It's all pre-recorded online video training, and then there's live Zoom Q&A at the end of every week. With the intensive bootcamp version for people who perhaps don't feel that they can do 12 weeks, even though it's kind of 2 or 3 hours a week, the bootcamp version delivers the identical curriculum but daily. So it's much more intense, but it's kind of good in a way, because people go, I've got 2 weeks to do this. Right. They set aside 2 or 3 hours a day, and they smash out those lessons. We have a live daily Q&A, so it's quite intensive, but it's really fun as well. So there's a couple of ways there to do that neuroscience course, or you can just buy the online curriculum and do a self-study version. The 12-week course and the bootcamp give people a certificate of continuing professional development certificate. Say if you're with the International Coach Federation, you can go and gain your 27 hours or whatever it is of professional development training. And I update them, pretty regularly. The sleep lesson, for example, needs a major update because that was done about 1.5 years ago. So I'm continuing updating that. And people come in, and then it's like a cult. So when you come in and you do one of the courses, you're automatically enrolled into each of the next cohorts. And some people, there's this guy called Amrish who was in India, and he first signed up in 2015, and he's still, every now and then he'll come into a Zoom, all of the years later, and his little daughter's in there, and she's been growing up over the years. And so some people have been around.
That's so cool.
Really long time.
I think that's a testament to you. I mean, I first discovered you. I started getting dialed into your work. I was like, she's brilliant, she's amazing. And then I want to do this boot camp. And then I was like, okay, July, okay, set the time up. And then it was, let's podcast. And again, I'm so grateful for this time with you. And then in all of my research and taking deeper dives into your work, I'm like, God, I just love learning from her. So I think that that's a big testament to, him, being here this long. And I feel like I'll be an alumni.
Well, and I suppose, my aim is really, the women's brain health one kind of steps through the lifespan. It's very, very kind of tightly related to the chapters of the book in a way, and it's very conversational based, and it's large. I think I've had about 150 women go through, and 2 blokes, and they were therapists, and they were very, very, they're real gentlemen who are very, gracious, and sort of sat in the background and listened. They were amazing to have involved in a largely kind of female circle type course. But what I'm really passionate about and interested in is not just talking at people and saying, this is how the brain sleeps, and this is what happens when you eat good food or food that you perhaps shouldn't, and what happens to your brain. It's giving people the tools to be able to go away and be apply some critical thinking to the neuroscience that they see or hear or read, give them the tools and the skills to be able to go away and sort of do some research almost on their own, and be able to figure out what they can and what they can't take from the neuroscience. Because a lot of the time there's still a real gap in between what we understand and what we can apply and what we can use. And I get people to sort of sit back and think, right, if I'm a coach and I'm interested in using neuroscience, what does even using neuroscience mean? Am I going to be talking about the brain to someone else? Do I know enough to be able to talk to them? Can I talk to my client about the brain? Or am I using some tools from neuroscience to teach in a way that will be more user-friendly for them? Or am I perhaps using a bit of knowledge about neuroscience to support some work I already do? So also it's about being very thoughtful about when we say using neuroscience, or we've learned about neuroscience, we're using it in our work, what does that even mean? Because I think we can, sometimes our enthusiasm for the topic can exceed our kind of skill set and ability and knowledge. So I also try and get people to be thoughtful about what they're doing with this knowledge that they now have.
I love that so much. One thing that bores me is lazy thinking and blanket statements.
Yeah. I can't. Yeah, we deal with, and there's a lot of them around the brain. The reptilian brain being the one that I like to snap. And I'm even kind of got a few issues with fight or flight, to be honest.
Really?
We deal with that. And I think this is a bit of an aside, the fight flight gives the impression that the only time your sympathetic nervous system is activated is in response to a life-threatening event.
Yeah.
And its digital effect from being chased by a hippo or a saber-toothed tiger. When, I mean, you can get excited about you're going to go on a podcast and have a really cool chat to someone, right, and the sympathetic nervous system will be activated because of the excitement or the thrill or the challenge or the opportunity, and we'll get a physiological response. It's got nothing to do with thinking that you're about to die.
Right.
And fight flight has almost become synonymous with sympathetic activation, which then gives the impression to someone when their heart rate rises that they are
in trouble,
about to get eaten.
Yeah.
And again, I think that's teaching people the wrong message about what's happening in our body.
Yep.
We're giving people a broad enough language and a broad enough kind of understanding of what's going on, so that our perception of what's happening has become narrowed by the choice of language.
Yeah.
Anyway, we talk about that kind of thing in the course too.
So good.
Using and choosing the appropriate metaphors and stories about the brain to talk to a particular person in a way that will make it meaningful for them. So all of that's kind of wrapped up in the course too.
So wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. That was so fun. And I can't wait. And obviously everything will be in the show notes for people to sign up. And as we get, closer, when I'm starting to enter the boot camp, you will be blasted all over my IG stories. So thank you for sharing that. Before I wrap us out, we talked about so much and I'm so appreciative. Is there anything that you would like to live in this amazing conversation, something that maybe you wish people would ask you more about, or just something in general, like a takeaway that you want to leave? And no pressure, no worries if not, because we did talk about a lot.
Look, I think perhaps the two most important things that we can do to take care of our brain is, one, sleep, and two, socialize. That's really kind of, sleep's the kind of the biological foundation, the bottom-up biological foundation of health. And then that enables us to be able to connect with other people in ways that our brains need, no matter which point in the lifespan we are. And if those are the two that I think that we should prioritize above. If we have to have a list of priorities, they should be the two that are at the top.
That's huge. Perfect. Thank you. Okay, so if you had a magic wand and you can give the masses one positive habit that would have a large ripple effect in their life, what would it be and why?
Go to bed when it gets dark.
Simple.
Yeah, get up.
I agree. Okay, wonderful. And so now we're going to move into rapid fire words. Again, whatever comes top of mind, top of heart. If you want to repeat, if you want to share your answer rapidly, great. If you
We're
want to
looking for
elaborate,
one-word answers.
no, you could elaborate.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
You're really long-winded, so I'll try and do one word.
Okay. Okay. First word is love.
Oh, I just think family.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. Fear.
Pandemic. Yeah.
Curiosity.
Oh, neuroscience.
That was almost a giveaway. Passion.
Neuroscience.
Mm. That works. Challenge.
Challenge. I'm trying. There's not one word I can think of. I'm like the word I came with was integral. I guess I was meaning like a challenge is like such an important part of passion and curiosity, I think.
I love that. I agree. Yeah.
Like a challenge.
Love it. Courage.
Courage, bravery. I think courage is about feeling fear and knowing that that's okay and trying to act anyway.
Yeah, I love it. Two more. Resilience.
Oh, resilience. I feel these days. Other people, instead of what's happening to me, what can I do about it? What's happening to us? How can we cope?
I love
Other
that.
people are the framework for that.
Beautiful. Final word is excellence.
Excellence.
Yeah.
Oh, oh, I'm always trying to get there, but no one ever thinks that they've got there. That's kind of a bit of a driver as well. Something to strive for.
Yeah, I love that. That's so good. It's so good. You are incredible. Thank you with all of my heart. Again, this has been so much. I mean, I could keep talking. I'm like, oh my gosh, she's got to get on with her day. So thank you. Thank you for everything that you are doing, that you're sharing, and how you're contributing to the world. And again, I'm just very grateful to be connected and excited to be continuously learning more from you. So thank you. And if you could leave our listeners, everything will be in the show notes, but best places to stay connected and work with you.
Yeah, for sure. You can find links out to my social media and my courses through my main website, which is drsarahmckay.com. So Mckay, spelled Mckay, which will be in your show notes. So if you go there, it's kind of the portal to everything.
Okay, beautiful. Thank you so much, Sarah. I hope you have a beautiful, beautiful day, and I will be connecting with you soon again.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I love chatting.
Thank you. Talk to you soon. Bye.